Pain is a lonesome place. I don't have to tell you, do I? It'll drop a rock in your stomach right through your pounding heart. And when your knees are so weak, you hit the ground and you finally realize you don't got this. Well, now you might just make it. You see, the tallest tree may not weather the storm, but its roots do. So dig in, stand up, and let the wind blow. Because there's hope.
All right, you guys. I am excited to continue this series that we have been in called I See You, where we've been talking about some things that they just don't normally get talked about in church. And we talk about some people that don't normally get talked about in church. And we're kind of tackling some stuff that is good for us, and hopefully it's been encouraging for us. But at the same time, it's not always easy to deal with. Have you found some encouragement in this series? Has it been good so far? All right. Well, I'm excited because we're kind of turning this morning in our series. We've been dealing with some conditions that a lot of us deal with: depression, grief, anxiety, things like that. Now we want to start talking to some people. And this is, when you talk to people, man, have you met people? They can be a little much. It's a lot. But you know what? It's okay, because this is not just Pastor Seth talking to people. This is God talking to people. And when God talks to people, he always has encouragement. He always has ways to build us up. And so we're going to find that a little bit today. We're going to talk a little bit today about some of the senior saints of the church. We're going to talk about some people in the church that what do you do when you're in the church and you're maybe of a certain age and you're starting to feel that age a little bit and starting to wonder whether or not your ministry and your legacy have passed you by. I'm going to be in Genesis chapter 18 today, so if you have your Bibles, great time to open those up, and we're going to talk a little bit about a time that God appeared to Abraham. Same with you online. You can check that out online. If not, don't worry about it. The words will be up here on the screen in back of me. But this is a story of a time that God appeared to Abraham, and he was well up in age, well up in years, and this is just kind of how it all went down. It says, the Lord appeared again to Abraham near the oak grove belonging to Mamre. One day, Abraham was sitting at the entrance to his tent during the hottest part of the day. He looked up and noticed 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he ran to meet them and welcomed them, bowing low to the ground. "My Lord," he said, "if it pleases you, stop here for a while. Rest in the shade of this tree while water is brought to wash your feet. And since you've honored your servant with this visit, let me prepare some food to refresh you before you continue on your journey." "All right," they said, "do as you have said." So Abraham went back. He ran back to the tent and said to Sarah, "Hurry, get the 3 large measures of your best flour, knead it into dough, and bake some bread." How classic is this? A guy invites a bunch of other guys over and tells his wife, "You got to cook stuff. Help me." This is awesome. I love this. This is just reading the Bible. That's all we're doing. Okay. Then Abraham, verse 7, ran out to the herd and chose a tender calf and gave it to his servant, who quickly prepared it. So they must have been staying a while because they're slaughtering a calf. That's it's going to take a minute, okay? I'm going to need some time to put that together. Who quickly prepared it. Verse 8, when the food was ready, Abraham took some yogurt and milk and roasted the meat. This sounds pretty good, actually. I'm a little hungry. Roasted the meat, and he served it to the men. As they ate, Abraham waited on them in the shade of the trees. "Where's Sarah, your wife?" the visitors asked. She's inside the tent," Abraham replied. Then one of them said, "I will return to you about this time next year, and your wife Sarah will have a son." Sarah was listening to this conversation from the tent, as all good wives do. She was listening from the tent. And Abraham and Sarah were both very old by this time. And Sarah was long past the age of having children. So she laughed silently to herself and said, how could a worn-out woman like me enjoy such pleasure, especially when my master, my husband, is also so old? The Lord then said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Why did she say, can an old woman like me have a baby? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she denied it, saying, I didn't laugh. But the Lord said, no. You did laugh. You did laugh. My message title for this morning is A Legacy of Laughter. A legacy of laughter. Let's dive in. Jesus, we are grateful for the opportunity to open up your word and just see all the ways that you work in your people. Thank you for people like Abraham and Sarah who are willing to have you work through them despite their age and circumstance, despite what they've been through in their lives and all the things that you've brought them through. Help us to learn from it and be inspired by it. And as we go through their story and we look at our own, I pray that you'd convict and guide and encourage us. In Jesus' name, we all said amen. Amen. Well, this morning, I'd like you to get into a time machine with me for just a minute, okay? And we're going to travel back to the year 2001. It is Sunday, December 15th. It's the weekend just after. It's the Sunday after the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City. And a very young 27-year-old Pastor Seth is preaching his very first sermon to his very first church ever. Yep. That was my first Sunday. That was my very first Sunday. That's how I got started in this mess called ministry. And I got started the week after the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. I've been brought into this church, it's 150 years old, in an effort to put a younger face on the platform. Because, the church thought that would solve the problem that the church was having, which was in every measurable way, this church was dying. Now, I didn't fully know that at the time. Sometimes, I'm just going to tell you right now, sometimes when a church hires a pastor, it's a little bit like dating. You know what I mean? It's a little bit, you don't always see it for what it is at the time. Like you tend to put your best foot forward, and then after the marriage vows are taken, something happens, and you're like, wait, you look like that without makeup? You know what I mean? Like, oh, you do that in your sleep? I didn't know about that, right? It's a surprise. It's a pleasant surprise as you go forward in your life, but not always a pleasant one. But the other part of it was that I didn't ask the right questions as we were moving forward. I was a 27-year-old rookie senior pastor, which I don't generally recommend for a career path for anybody. But that's a whole different story. Just the learning curve is just real high. It's just really, really high. And it didn't take long to figure out that the church was dying. I knew that we were in trouble before we ever really started, when my first 2 funerals that I ever did took place in back-to-back weeks in the 2 weeks that were prior to my scheduled start date with the church. 2 members of the search team that were instrumental in bringing me into that situation, men who were going to be huge allies to me as I was going into this ministry in this church, both of them passed away unexpectedly in back-to-back weeks just prior to my start. And then it was 9/11, and I had never done a funeral before, and I'll be forever grateful for the grace of a very kind funeral director in our town who coached me through every little step of the way of how to do a funeral. I've never done this before. Oh my gosh, the whole world is going on fire here. This is unbelievable. But that's how I got started in ministry. My very first church, 2 funerals of men that were going to be my greatest allies, and then 9/11. In the hiring process, I'd been told that the church ran about 90 to 100 people, given any given Sunday. And in my first 8 weeks of the church, we averaged a whopping 32 people a week. 32 people per week. Offerings were 60 to 70% beneath where the budget was set for that year. I had just moved my little family to this town in Podunk, Minnesota for this job, and I was officially, at this point, completely freaked out. Completely scared out of I was so worried that I'd made a horrible, horrible mistake. God, I think I misheard you on this situation. Myself and my VW Passat don't seem to fit in this little small town in Minnesota. I don't know what's going on here, but this doesn't seem like it. I called a mentor of mine to come in and serve as a consultant to our church board, and we got to work on what would end up being a 5-year process of trying to turn this church around. And after the first meeting that I'd had with the board, with him, I was sitting in my office the very next morning when an elderly member of the board stopped by my church unexpectedly to have a chat with his pastor. Came up to me. We'll call him Ernie, okay? Ernie sat himself down in my office chair, and this is no joke, direct quote what he said. He said, I'm going to tell you something right now about this church. We don't want change and we don't need change. I'm going to tell you that right now. He said, you know what the problem in our church is? We've never once had a good pastor, not once, and that includes you. Yep. He said, take a look at the house that you just bought. It's a crap house. Everybody knows it's a crap house. So if you think you're going to come in here and you're going to start changing things, I'm just going to tell you the more you try, the harder it's going to get, and I'm going to make sure of that. So I just want you to know that. And by the way, why in the world would you ever think we need to change in the first place? Would you like some coffee or some, I don't know, maybe a laxative of some kind? It's a little rough. Ernie was easily 3 times my age at that point in my life. He had lived in this town his whole life. And listen, many of the people in this church, okay, many of them, listen, they grew up together, they farmed together, they married each other, they raised their families together, and now they've reached a life stage where they are dying together. They actually, this was a running joke in the church, that the joke was that the last one to die should make sure that the lights are shut off and the heat's off in the church building. They had no interest in reaching others for Christ, no interest in mission, no interest in what came after them in the life of this church. So I sat there and I asked him, I said, Ernie, what do you want your legacy to be? Well, Ernie did not like that question very much. He was a little upset that I had asked it. And so this is, again, you can't make this stuff up. I should write a book about this. Ernie left that meeting, stormed out of my office, and he went out and started a rumor in the church that I had been, I love this. I wish it were true. It's not. But he said, or the rumor was that I had been sent to this church by our denomination with a secret mission of shutting them down, stealing all of their assets, and starting a brand new church with the money. They had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank. That's how they could afford to be ineffective. Because how many people, if you know, if you're going to be ineffective, you have to be able to be affording to be ineffective. They had a war chest of money in the bank. And he thought that I'd been sent by the denomination on a secret mission to steal the stuff and start a new church with it. I mean, there's a pervert. I'm a pastor, you know? I'm not a double O. I wish I were. That would be super cool. I'm not cool enough to get secret missions, okay? I'm just not. And if I were, I mean, can I tell you something? Just respectfully, that this church, just in the grand scheme of heaven's, you know, what's going on here and all that kind of stuff, respectfully, I mean, you guys aren't like hacking the Chinese government. You know what I mean? You're not like in the rank of importance of like where the secret missions would go. Probably isn't here. I'm just saying. It's crazy times. Fast forward 7 years. 7 years have gone by. I'm the pastor of a new church plant that's beginning to grow. I was asked by the executive pastor of our denomination to be on the executive team and help lead the pastors' council. It's a small group of pastors. We'd go around the state and we'd meet with churches that were troubled or going through conflicts or just different things that were tough, and we'd help them try to figure out what to do. We got called into a church where they're having all kinds of really terrible conflicts, really rough stuff, and the church was dying. It was dying. We set up a meeting with them, and one side would get up and complain about the other side. It was like just a volleyball of destruction, watching them lob grenades over the net at each other. And one of them got up and he said, I'm never going to forget this in my whole life. He said, listen, I brought some friends here with me from another church, and they can attest to the fact that changes like the ones that these people are trying to make in our church are a total disaster. They were a part of a church that not too long ago, some young whippersnapper of a pastor came up to their church, started making all these changes and messing with this stuff, and they tell me that it's the worst thing that ever happened to them. I looked behind the guy. Who do you think I saw? You've got to be kidding me. Hello, Ernie. You're right there. I leaned over to my executive pastor, and I told him, I think me coming up here was probably a bad idea tonight. This probably isn't a great thing. And he said, why? Is everything okay? Are you feeling all right? I was like, I'm fine. But I was that pastor. I'm the guy he's talking about. And my executive pastor, he leans over to me and he goes, that's Ernie? I said, yep. Other members of this little team were trying to speak into this situation, calm people down, get them all situated, until the same man who'd brought his good buddy Ernie told everyone that, listen, we've all heard the story of how bad that young pastor was. And he said, we've heard from everybody, and he came up and he pointed right at me with his bony little finger. He said, we've heard from everybody but you, Pastor Hinrichs. He said, what do you think we should do? My executive pastor was like melting into a puddle right next to me. He's just about wanting to die, like, don't say it, don't do it, don't take the bait, let's just get out of here. I looked beyond him, and I made eye contact with Ernie. And I said, well, it depends on what you want your legacy to be. I was a lot bolder when I was younger. I did stuff like that. Man alive, I'm telling you, you have never seen blood boil until you've seen my man Ernie lose it in a church meeting. I thought I was going to need an armed escort to get out of the church that night. I thought for sure this is it. This is the night Ernie loses it. He's going to show up with a shotgun. It's going to be awful. Come to think of it, I don't really know why I needed a break from ministry for a few years. It's so easygoing and it's so peaceful all the time just to follow Jesus and, do his work. It's fun, really. I don't really know what happened. We're in a series today called I See You. And we're speaking to issues and to people that the church doesn't often speak into. And today, just for a few minutes, what I want to do is I want to talk to the senior saints of the church. And I want to talk to all of us, okay? I'm talking to all of us. But what I really want to dive into this morning is this idea of legacy and what it means to trust God and live like you trust him from the starting line all the way to the finish line of your life. Because can I tell you something about the senior saints of the church that I've learned over time, that I've learned in working with them and doing church with them and doing life with them, about the Ernies of the church, as grumpy and mean and ornery as Ernie could be. This is honestly the truth about people who are in that age bracket. We live in a day and in a time when people who are over a certain age in the church, the more senior members of the saints, have been made to feel irrelevant. I'm going to turn 50 in October. I'm not 27 anymore. And I've got a little more seasoning under my belt. So I feel like I can speak to this issue with a little bit more perspective, but man alive, you go to a website or you look at a church's social media these days of most churches, you would think that everybody in the church all over America is between the ages of 25 and 40, and that the women all wear the trendiest outfits you've ever seen, and the men are all in skinny jeans and beanies. Okay? It's just the truth. It's crazy. It's crazy. Statistically, the church in America has not only aged, but we are closing the doors of churches faster than like we've never seen this kind of closing all over the country of churches before. And more, people who grew up in the church, come on, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, come on, some people in the 80s, okay? People who grew up in that church, they're finding themselves displaced and not knowing what to do as churches that are all around them are sprouting up, and they see them as younger, cooler, more hip, trendy, all that kind of stuff. And they're picking up the torch, and they're the ones trying to move it forward. So some people just withdraw entirely, and they just huddle together, and they try to shut the world out. Let the last one who dies be the one to hit the lights and the heat, right? The church of today is not the same church that they've known, and they can very much feel like their best days of discipleship are behind them. Their prime of their ministry years have come and gone. And if by chance, they do find a church home that they feel kind of okay about, they feel ornamental and decorative at best. That we're just kind of wallflowers. Nobody asks us to do anything. We don't really represent anything. We're just kind of here. And the truth is that the music is so loud and different, that the hymns that they grew up singing, that they're not sure they want to be anything more than decorative anyway. It's a hard place to be. When you get to an age where you feel overlooked and like you no longer matter or have nothing to contribute. So we're asking the question today, what would God say both to the Ernies in the church and, come on, what would he say to the church about the Ernies? Okay, what would God say to those in the church who feel like their legacy has passed them by and their best days are just behind them, like they're just too old to make a difference? I've got 3 things I want to talk with you about this morning from this text. Are you ready to hit this with me? Okay, if you're ready, shout legacy. Oh, you can do better than that. Shout legacy. All right. Listen, I don't care how old you are or what you're in the middle of, you are in the process of building a legacy. Well, let's dive right into the text. First thing I want to talk about is the fact that your legacy is the story of your partnership with God. That's what your legacy is. It's the story of your partnership with God. You know what's funny about this story from Genesis 18, and the story of Abraham making all this food and Sarah LOLing God, okay? The reason she's laughing is that the story didn't start in Genesis 18. To Sarah, the joke really started back in Genesis 12. It started well over 30 years, 40 years prior to this. Genesis 12 is where Abraham was first called by God. It says this in Genesis 12, 1 through 4, that the Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your native country, your relatives, your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous." I'm going to make you famous. I mean, it's just, you'll be a blessing to others. I'll bless those who bless you. I'll curse those who curse you with contempt. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you. So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot, who was his nephew, went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Now, I want you to notice, when Abram was called by God, how old was he? How old was he? 75, exactly, right? And listen, for the purposes of this message, we're not going to get into the whole question of how does the Old Testament count the years of somebody's life versus how do we count the life of someone now in the years and the passage of time. That's a different sermon, okay? From here, for today, all we need to know is that at the time Abram is first called by God, he old. Okay? He's just real old. And from there, it's not like God was real quick in bringing about this famousness and the calling and the descendants and all that kind of stuff. That's what the next chapters of Genesis are all about as they span the next 25, 30, 35, 40 years. Genesis 13, Abram is all excited and he's building altars everywhere he goes. God's going to make me famous. It's going to be great. I'm so excited. It's going to be awesome. Genesis 14, Abram rescues his nephew Lot. The family's getting involved now. Family identity's starting to change and form around this stuff. Genesis 15, Abram is starting to complain that, we were talking about kids. I still don't have any. This isn't going really well. I'm wondering where you're at in all of this. Hasn't happened yet. Genesis 16, Abram made a mistake and tried to create his own legacy outside of God's provision and inside of his impatience. It was actually Sarah's idea, but that's another story, and probably not with kids in the room. Okay, so that's the situation there. Okay, Genesis 17, Abram is 99 years old. God reaffirms the covenant, renames Abram and Sarai to Abraham and Sarah. Abram is 99, and he tells him, you have one job. You and your descendants must obey me. You got to follow me. You got to go do and live how I'm teaching you to go do and live. That's the story of how we got here. It took decades to get to this point. Sarah hears again the calling of God, the promise of God. And this time, instead of a quick, yes, Lord, okay, followed by her obedience, her response is to laugh. And it still wasn't even over, because after the Lord did provide them with a child, by the way, they named him Isaac. The meaning of the word Isaac is laughter. They named their baby Laughter. And in Genesis 22, God tells Abraham, by the way, I need you to sacrifice your laughter to me. I need you to sacrifice your joy. I need you to sacrifice Isaac to me. That's not really what God wanted, but he's testing to see how far Abraham's trust went in this relationship. Do you really believe? And are you willing to live in such a way that you really do trust this relationship? Are you willing to live in such a way that you trust that I am who I say I am, and I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do? Abraham's legacy is a legacy of faith, not because he believed that God was going to show up in the short term, but because when it came to his faith, age and time were not limiting factors for Abraham. They weren't. This isn't something that he was in for a short-term partnership on. Abraham made a covenant with God. It was a long-term deal. God, I will follow. I'll obey. I'll live how you say to live. I'll do what you say to do. This is years and years and years of this, decades of Abraham doing this at this point. We've talked about this a few times in this series already, that when it comes to your life and your calling, God is always playing the long game with you. He's always playing the long game. He's literally in it with us to infinity and beyond. Literally. There were plenty of times Abraham was disappointed. Plenty of times he's confused. Plenty of times he's mixed up. Plenty of times he's wondering what in the world is going on around here, and what's this world coming to, and how does my calling fit into that? But he never quit, because God doesn't just call people for a season, or until they're tired, or until they want to retire, or until they want to quit. The Bible says that Abraham's faith was credited to him as righteousness. The longevity of this man's partnership with God, being willing to stick it out like that, that is rare stuff in the church today or then. We need saints in the church who have decades of following Jesus under their belts. Who's going to disciple new believers? Who's going to mentor the next generation? Whose faith is going to bring the financial building blocks that keep the church alive? Who are the 20 and 30-somethings in the church going to turn to when they need help understanding something, or when they need experience to lean into, or when we need wisdom about how to face doubt and complexity and faith and raising kids and staying on mission? Listen, you don't get less important as you grow older in the faith. You get more important as you grow older, if you grow in the right way. If you grow in the right way. The church doesn't need you less, it needs you more. As long as you're still partnering with God, then listen, I know these kids today look real different than your life looked when you grew up. They look different than when I grew up. Heck, they look different than they did 10 minutes ago, okay? I'm just saying. But we need some people who've spent a lifetime following Jesus and all of the ups and downs that come with it, who are willing to take their spot in the church. Say, listen, if you guys are going to see the miracles we did in our day, if you're going to see God do in your day what he did in mine, if you're going to get to know the God that I've come to know in the course of my life, you got to be committed to loving him and walking with him in the long term like I am. Let me show you how to do that. Sarah's laughter is a kind of a mocking laughter. But it comes after decades of following God. And now you're telling me this, that all this time, I'm well over 100 years old, and I'm going to have a baby now. And now you want to talk calling. Now you want to talk fulfillment. Why? Well, I don't know. Maybe, Sarah, it takes a lifetime of following him to have something to be built on in your life. Sometimes it takes God, it takes him decades just to set you up, to get you ready for the one thing he's called you to do. That's it. Moses didn't get called by God till he was 40. Joshua, who led Israel after him, he didn't take over till he was 80. Listen, church, you don't discount age as something that God can't use. This isn't the time to turn off the lights and kill the heat. Okay? This is the time to say, what have I learned? How do I pass it on? Okay? What kind of legacy is God wanting to build in me, in my family, in my life, in my relationships? If you've really been following God, if you're really paying attention, if you've really been all about what you say you've been all about and partnering with God in your life, getting older is not the time to shrink away from your calling. That's when you should have the most momentum in it. That you should be the most on fire, the most dead set, the most at peace with who God is and who he's made you to be. This is when mission-minded, partnership with God kind of people, they say, okay, God, what's next? How do I lean in? Your legacy, what people will remember about you, it's not going to come from a minute of following. It comes from following all the way to the end. So that as time goes on, your life in the church, you're not shrinking back. You're not walking away as you get older. It's about doing more of it. I'm going to be doing it bigger, badder, bolder, and better than I ever have the older I get. There's no retirement plan in God's kingdom. In God's kingdom, the retirement plan is death. And by the way, I'm pretty sure when you get to heaven, they're not playing shuffleboard. Okay? I'm just saying. I hope not anyway. Okay? Your legacy is built on the ways you partner with God in your life. How did you heal when somebody hurt you? How did you experience grief, and how did you get through that when you lost that friend, or you lost that parent, or you lost that loved one? How did you manage your family? How did you instill faith in them? How did you steward your money? My goodness, in the course of your lifetime, how did God surprise you? How did you manage the scary stuff of life? Anybody here ever get scared and feel like you could use the wisdom of somebody who's been scared before and come through it to speak over you in your life? These are things that took place over the years of faith with people. And to all my older saints in the church, there are things that the church desperately needs from you today. Your legacy is built on your partnership with God through the extended course of your life. That's what you're passing on. But that longevity is based on the idea that you've continued to partner with him. And that gets us into this. Number 2, that your legacy is the story of your response to God. Your response to God. See, people respond to God and his offer of partnership with us in our lives in different ways. Some people will partner with God for a season until that season is no longer the season that they thought it would be. Okay? Or it involves doing things that they don't want to do. Or it involves doing a big, scary thing called, wait for it, changing things. That's scary. Or they'll follow God and they'll partner with him until what God wants them to do is no longer what they want to do. It no longer serves me. It's not pleasant to me. It's not palatable to me. It no longer is in line with what my preferences are. It's not from my era. It's no longer really the model I grew up with. This isn't really a smooth ride the way it used to be. We've been through some stuff now, and we've gotten through some stuff, and it's gotten harder to partner with God over the years. So instead of responding to God's calling on us in a new season of life and being excited about that, or in a new chapter and telling God, here I am, send me, we respond with laughter and a yeah, right. People respond to God all kinds of ways, man. And the response becomes our partnership, which becomes our legacy. Even in the church today, we have an epidemic in the church today of short-sighted responses to God and how he's asked us to live. We think that partnership with God is a disposable thing that's based on our cultural preferences and relational ease. We do. We throw things away in this culture quicker and faster than you can blink. You can even identify. We just, screw it. I deserve more. I'm not doing this. I deserve better. So God, to your calling and to your word, I say ha, ha, ha. I'm not doing it. People respond in all kinds of ways. You can go Ernie on it and get mad. That can be your legacy. It was for Ernie, I can tell you that. You can quit. That can be your legacy. This is where I get off the bus. This is as far as I am willing to go. You can run away. That can be your legacy. You can retire, and that can be your legacy. I don't need to be a part of a church that's on mission. I just need to be a part of a church that's kicking it the way I used to. Back in the day, that's what I want. Can I tell you a secret about life? And people over a certain age in the room, you can back me up on this, okay? So much of life is about how you respond. So much of life is about how you respond to it. It's true inside your closest relationships. It's true with your jobs. It's true about money. It's true with parenting. It's true with calling. The legacy of your partnership with God will be determined by your response to him when he asks you to do something that you don't really want to do. Or go someplace that you don't really want to go. Or work through something in your life or in your heart you don't really want to work through. You're going to kick that habit. You're going to heal from that wound. You're going to forgive that person. You're going to keep pursuing those kids and those grandkids, even when you don't understand their world and the pressures they're facing, even when they're walking away from you and that just digs into your heart. You're going to keep an open heart and an open mind to what God wants to do with you next. You're going to be a part of something that's going to reach a new generation for Jesus. You're going to show the church what it means to rely on God in your life. You're going to pass your faith on, even when it's hard and you don't know how. Or are you just going to get mad, Ernie? You got a choice. You're going to get lost in your grief, retreat from the world. This is legacy stuff. These are legacy decisions. Listen, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, honestly, even 40-somethings out there, don't you miss this. Faith is never a one-and-done decision. Never. This is something you have to learn to choose to respond to the world with over and over again. Your legacy is built on your responses. You're building a legacy every single day with every single decision you make. Every decision is a vote for the person you want to be. So what version of yourself are you voting for? What version of God are you voting for? Those decisions, they are happening now. They're happening right now in your life. You think God isn't watching the way you vote? Or watching the way you respond? He told Sarah, yeah, you did laugh. The Bible said she did it silently. God's like, yeah, I saw that. I heard that. Even after all this time, Sarah, you still don't believe that I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. And in your laughter or your anger or your retreat, grief, you're making this more about you than it is about me. Because your response doesn't just reveal your level of partnership with God. It reveals, watch this now, it reveals who you serve. who you serve. Your partnership with God reveals your responses to God over a sustained time. And your response to God over a sustained time, if you really peel it back, it reveals who you serve. So your legacy is about the way you serve God. When I'm around other pastors, and I'm telling them the story of Second Story Church and how we all came to be and how we do this every week and all that kind of stuff, other church planters in particular, one of the most common questions I get, because it's a real common church planting question, is, who are you guys, who are you trying to reach? Who's your people? Who's your niche? Who are you trying to reach? What's your demographic? Trying to reach like young families? Trying to reach college kids, hipsters, boomers, Gen Z, millennials? God, somebody save the millennials. Right? My response has never wavered. I always tell people, I'm trying to reach everybody. I'm trying to reach everybody. And people always look at me like I've got three heads when I say that. Whoa there. Slow. I know you've been away for a minute. Just calm down a little. I'm trying to reach everybody. The response usually is that, listen, nobody tries to reach everybody. You can't reach everybody. Nobody does that. I don't know. I think Jesus kind of did. Is that not who we serve? I do not believe that the church was meant to be divided by age or generation. I don't care if you're 90 or 19. Brokenness is brokenness. Healing is healing. I need people in the church who are new to faith, because if we're not seeing people who are new to faith, then that means we're not reaching our community. That means we're not spreading the gospel, and we're not seeing new believers accept Christ. And if that's the case, then we are not doing our jobs that was given to us by Jesus. But I also need the saints of the church to be willing to take them under their wing. I need their experience and their wisdom to breathe into the newbies. I need their financial support to make this happen. Come on, somebody. I need their experience to steady the ship a little bit in some of the cray-cray that's out there right now, okay? I need some saints, both old and young, who are focused not on what sets them apart or what kind of demographic they fit into, because they're just focused on Jesus. Proverbs 16:31 says that gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained by living a godly life. A godly life. Tell me about it. Right? Have you heard anything I've said this morning? Ministry is stressful, man. I don't care if you're a pastor or not. Ask Abraham. I don't even think Abraham had any hair left by the time it was all over. Ask Sarah. Or tell you what, here's another old dude in the Bible who found out the same thing. His name was Solomon. Solomon, the Bible describes him as the wisest and wealthiest person who's ever lived. How's that for a retirement plan? Okay. Wisest and wealthiest man who ever lived. So this is what the wisest person who's ever lived said about the meaning of life. And I want you to imagine, as I'm reading these words, I want you to imagine a really old man sitting at his desk and starting to tear up as he thinks about the friends that he's lost and times that have come and gone, and memories he can't get rid of but wish that he could, and hurts that he's created. This is what he said about trying to find the meaning of life. He said this in Ecclesiastes 2:1-11. He said, I said to myself, come on, let's try pleasure. Let's look for the good things in life. But I found that this too was meaningless. So I said, laughter is silly. What good does it do to seek pleasure? After much thought, I decided to cheer myself with wine. That's a good idea. And while still seeking wisdom, I clutched at foolishness. In this way, I tried to experience the only happiness most people find during their brief life on this world. I also tried finding meaning by building huge homes for myself. Notice plural, multiple homes for myself, by planting beautiful vineyards. I made gardens and parks, filling them with all kinds of fruit trees. I built reservoirs to collect water and irrigate my many flourishing groves. I bought slaves, both men and women, and others were born into my household. I also owned large herds and flocks, more than any of the kings who lived in Jerusalem before me. I collected great sums of gold and silver, the treasure of many kings and provinces. I hired wonderful singers, both men and women, and have many beautiful concubines. If you don't know what a concubine is, I'm not explaining that right now, okay? I had everything that a man could desire. So I became greater than all who lived in Jerusalem before me. My wisdom never failed me. Anything I wanted, I'd take. I denied myself no pleasure. I even found great pleasure in hard work, a reward for all my labors. But as I looked at everything that I'd worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. There's really nothing worthwhile anywhere. And then he goes on from Ecclesiastes 2. He tells the whole story of all of this stuff, the comings and the goings and the people and the women and the breakups and the blah, 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 wine and the, oh my gosh. And in the end, in Ecclesiastes 12, as he's winding the story down, this is what he says, Ecclesiastes 12:13. He says, that's the whole story. Here now is my final conclusion. This is everything I've learned. Fear God. Obey his commands. For this is everyone's duty. That's the ballgame. And then Ecclesiastes 12, it starts off with this giant plea to young people to, would you just listen to wisdom from the people around you. Don't hide from the older saints who are here to help. And to the old people, he's saying, come on, I don't care if you're old, you keep obeying. That is your duty. That's your calling. Your time is not over. It's just time for a new chapter. If you're still breathing, then God's not done with you yet. You old people and you young people, you need each other. You can laugh, you can cry, you can get mad, you can throw a tantrum, go nuts. What do you want your legacy to be? I know of churches that almost seem embarrassed that anybody in the church has gray hair. God forbid we put a picture on Instagram of someone over 40. That'd be awful. I know of other churches where they've so given up on the young people and generations that came after them that you practically need to show your AARP card just to get in the worship service. You know? I know of family-oriented kinds of churches. Lots of programming that they're just so proud and clear about their programming, but they haven't grown and they haven't expanded the kingdom and they haven't reached a truly lost person in years, and the truth is they wouldn't know what to do if they did. I know of other churches that are so focused on being hip and trendy that today's Super Bowl halftime show would probably compare with some of the crazy that's happening in their worship service right now. Listen, I don't care what the age of the stage is. I don't care what the latest TikTok trend is. I don't care what century the song was written in or how good the programming is. When a church exists to serve itself and perpetuate its own existence, when a church gives up on mission and starts maintaining, and when a church and the disciples in it are more proud of their accomplishments and their history and who they think they are and what they think of themselves, when a church and disciples start serving itself, that is where a legacy of joy-filled laughter becomes a legacy of the laughter of, yeah, right. I'm not doing that. I'm not going there. I'm not reaching them. That's somebody else's job. That's a response that reveals a heart that is not serving God. It is serving itself. And when people or churches begin to serve themselves, you know what happens to legacies? They die. Solomon said, I tried all of it. I tried all of it. I thought that it would bring my joy back to my laughter. The only thing that has brought joy back to my laughter is remembering to do what God says to do, to obey him continually and never, ever, ever, ever stop. Never. That's the whole ball game. That's what the wisest man on earth is trying to teach his kids in his old age. Sarah got over her laughter and then had a son, Isaac, that she named Laughter, who had a son, who begat a son, who begat a son, who begat a son, until one of those sons was named Jesus, who said in Matthew 3 that being a son of Abraham means nothing if you don't live like it. And then he went out and he showed us how to do just that. That's the inheritance that we have. That's the legacy that God has left us. And it's a legacy that's born out of his heart of love that came through a child named Laughter. What's your legacy? You want to know a great way to measure your legacy? Ask yourself this. When the end of your life comes, and it will come, what do you want to be laughing about at the end of your life? Live like that now. When I'm a really old man, I'm getting there. I'm not there yet, but I'm on my way. I hope that I'm sitting with my kids and with my great grandkids at church. And I hope I'm there and I'm just hating on and super crabby about the music. I hope I am. And what we need around here is a little Lord, I lift your name on high. We need a little awesome God. We need a song with a ribbon dance team going around. The 90s are back. I hope that my grandkids' church does look a lot different than the church that I grew up with. Because in order to reach people that haven't been reached, you got to do stuff that you haven't been doing. But my prayer is that I'm going to get a front row seat to watch them discover the God that I've spent a lifetime discovering. And a lifetime following. And a lifetime of overcoming with him. And a lifetime of being healed by and walking in the faith that he's given to me to pass on to them. When I die, I want my legacy to be one that's laughing my way into heaven at everything that I was so worried about that just doesn't matter. Everything that I held on to that I didn't need to hold on to. Everything that God has seen me and my people through, that's what I want to laugh at. How about you? God sees you. He's not done with you. And when your life ends someday, what do you want to be laughing at as you cross that gate into heaven and into the arms of Jesus? What do you want to be smiling and laughing with him about? What's stopping you from living in that kind of joy now? Jesus, we ask that your direction would be over each of us as we consider our legacy and how to best steward the gift of grace and love that you've given to each of us. Thank you for the ways that you call us deeper into relationship with you over the course of years, over the course of sustained decision after decision, season after season, chapter after chapter. Thank you for those in the church who've led by example and help us to be wise enough to learn from them as they keep living for you. Pray these things in your name.